Welcome to the sixth presentation in the series where we're looking at the book of Revelation. I've entitled this, Opening the Scroll. As usual, let's just look back on where we've been in the previous presentations. Jesus has taken John behind the scenes to see some deep spiritual realities. And chapters 4 and 5 are vivid word pictures that show deep spiritual realities. And they convey deep spiritual insights. So, for example, chapter 4 reveals the transcendent majesty of God. God is just a way beyond us. Chapter 5 focuses on the key figure of the risen Jesus on the throne. Chapter 6 is a kind of preview of what was about to happen for the people to whom this letter was written. It's not a good story. Suffering and martyrdom were coming. They already experienced a bit of it, and much more was coming. But God was still in control. They were to hang on to that. And there is justice and judgment. God will come and put things right. Visions convey meaning. Jesus taken John behind the scenes. He's lifted the lid to see what's happening in the spiritual realm. The aim is to prepare the people of God for a period of intense persecution that was coming. Chapter 3 speaks of the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. That was coming, and we'll see later in this presentation it did come. Behind the scenes, what's going on? It seemed to these people that the power of Rome was in complete control. Not so. Behind the scenes, God is still on the throne. And today, when we look out through our television screens on the world around, it looks like the world is out of control. Let's remember God's still on the throne. And God's victory comes through the Lamb. Not violence, not brute force, but through suffering love. And chapter 5 focused on that. There's a kind of dramatic sequence in all of this. Jesus takes the scroll. It's given to him. He alone is qualified to open it because he is the Lion who is the Lamb. The scroll contains the destiny of events for these people. So the 7 seals. The sealing was complete and perfect. No one else could open it but Jesus. And that's why John was summoned into the spiritual realms. Think of heaven as spiritual realms, not a place. So that John could see what was happening behind the scenes and relay that back in this letter to his hearers. And at that point there's an explosion of worship in the heavenly realms, in the spiritual realms. It ripples out. There are spiritual beings and the humans are right across all humanity. And the central focus on Jesus, the Lion, who is the Lamb. And he won the victory because he was the Lamb and is the Lamb and went to the cross for humanity. We're going to pick this up later on, perhaps in the next presentation. We think our prayers don't matter. They kind of hit brick walls. Nothing ever seems to happen. Prayers are being heard. And that's vitally important for those who are under the brutality of persecution. I can't pretend to fully understand it, but it does matter. And there is this central New Testament picture that's given to us throughout the New Testament. Victory in the sense of the Roman Empire, came through brute violence, force, imposition of one group on another group. And it's exactly the same throughout the world today. You see it at the political level. You even sadly see it at the religious level. The great revelation is that victory comes through sacrifice, the Lion who became the Lamb, and who is the Lamb. And that is true for us today, the followers of Jesus. That's why John was taken into heaven. And now we're going to look at the scroll being opened. So let's move on. The Lion who is the Lamb, the only one qualified to break the seals and open the scroll. Now we've got to remember that chapters 2 and 3, that's the specific directions to these 7 followers of Jesus, 7 groups of them, the 7 churches. It really starts at verse 17 of chapter 1. The instructions Jesus gave to John was, "Write therefore what you have seen, what is now, and what will take place later." In other words, it's for the here and now and what's just about to happen. That's the primary target of all that's being written. And chapter 2 and 3 just lead on to chapter 4. There's no break in the original language. The chapter divisions are artificial additions. And chapter 4 leads on to chapter 5. And that leads on to chapter 6. We've got to see this as a sequence, a cohesive whole. We can't just lift things and pull them apart. And the 7 seals of the scroll are opened throughout chapter 6 and at the beginning of chapter 8. Now we're going to look at chapter 6 today, and chapter 7 and 8 we will leave to the next presentation. A word of warning. There are vivid pictures here and strange ideas fly all over the place. And unsurprisingly, we human beings have come up with bizarre interpretations. So treat with a pinch of salt much that you've read and heard. Let's look at what it actually says. Let's remember that the whole book is a book of Revelation and Apocalypse. That's the style of writing. It's a book of prophecy, and it's a letter addressed to real people at the end of the 1st century AD. An Apocalypse unveils deep truths about what was happening in a way that made the letter unintelligible to state authorities. That's why it has vivid pictures and strange ideas. It would make sense to the hearers. It wouldn't make sense to the Roman authorities. Prophecy reveals what God thinks of all that's going on, and how in the end he's going to put things right, how he's going to act. It's a message for the here and now and into the immediate future. It is not celestial timekeeping. And the letter was addressed to real people who lived in a real part of the world, who were facing horrendous problems, and it was going to get a lot worse. Brutal persecution at the hand of the Roman authorities. We interpret the whole book in the light of how the original hearers would have got it, because that was the primary audience for the book, and it's got enormous value for us today. Right into chapter 6. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. His rider held a bow and was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. His rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a black horse. His rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, a kilogram of wheat for a day's wages, and 3 kilograms of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a quarter of the earth, to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth, killing a significant minority. Four horses, and the amount that's been written about the 4 horses of the apocalypse, which is just fiction. This is vivid imagery. This is apocalyptic writing, not literalism. Specifically says phrases like given power. Come back to that in a moment. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer, till the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed, just as they had been. Slain is slaughtered. It's not a pretty picture. Under the altar, an altar in the spiritual realms, there is no need for an altar there. It's imagery. Their death under the altar, carrying the idea that their sacrifice, their martyrdom, will open the door for others to find Jesus, as is always the case. We look at the Word of God and we think of the Bible. That's not what the phrase means. It's the wrong word for word. The word that's used here is a much, much bigger word with a much wider range of meaning. It's not the written word. It's used of Jesus as the Word of God. Carries the idea of central truth and fundamental principle. Now, of course, the Bible points to that. But it's bigger than that. This is the central truth and fundamental principle. Jesus embodies it. And watch the word testimony. In the original, it's the same word that is used, translated martyrdom. When we are faithful to Jesus, there is a possibility that we'll pay the penalty of our lives for that. Persecution may come before it. Going on, I watched as he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Don't take that literalistically and try and picture it. It's apocalyptic language. We'll come back to the meaning of it in a moment or two. A lot of it draws from Old Testament language. Many of these ideas you can find in the prophetic literature. Again, it's the same thing. It's a picture. These are metaphors. It's typical of the kind of language used, of the literary structure that's the apocalypse, and the prophetic language to communicate ideas. If you like, God's response will be a total upturning of the order of society. A kind of comprehensive impact on humanity. And we've seen that down through the ages from time to time, when the world order has gone into chaos. And there's the flickerings of signs of that happening today. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hidden caves and among the rocks of the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? It's an interesting comment. Those who oppose the way of Jesus, when they're faced with the consequences of what they're doing and have done, they seem to prefer suicide rather than face the truth and face the consequences for their actions. You can see flickerings of that in the way many key Nazi leaders preferred to commit suicide and were supplied with the means to do it, rather than face the consequences for their brutality on Western Europe. The seventh seal, chapter 6 deals with 6 seals opened, and then chapter 7 there's an interlude. In the next presentation we'll look at how that interlude and why it's there. And it's not till chapter 8 that the 7th seal is opened. And that immediately leads into another set of 7. This time 7 trumpets. There is a sequence. We need to see it as a sequence. There are vivid images here. They convey meaning. And we see the sequence as a whole. And we're going to try in this presentation to look at least the first 6 seals being opened and see it as a whole. In fact, there are 3 sets of 7s in the book of Revelation: the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. They're pictures of events to come, events that have happened several times. It's not chronological. That's not the way the language structure uses. The intensity sometimes increases. They're saying similar things. Sometimes the details sharpen up a little bit. What it's really talking about is repeated upsurges of evil. And if we look back from the perspective of history, we can see that the world has gone through cycles of upsurges of evil. And I think we may be entering one at the moment, sadly. And it's God allowing consequences to follow human rebellious actions. We'll tease that out in a moment. They were given power is a phrase that repeats itself. Let's move on. The 7 seals. And we're going to look at this from several perspectives to see if we can build up a picture and understanding that will be helpful for us today. The 4 horses and their colours. It has been suggested that the white is a kind of demonic parody of Jesus. These are evil, evil forces, the powers of the demonic world. Red is war and bloodshed, black famine, and paleness signifies death. Just in passing, in the black horse, there's a mention to preserving olive trees and vines. Now that may relate, we're not sure. There was a decree in AD 92 by the emperor, a very bad emperor, a very evil man, and he reduced olive and vine growing across the Roman state. It was entirely to create more wealth for himself, and it affected this area particularly badly. Let's look at the picture of them all. There's a description summary of it. The white horse, a rider with a bow and a crown, power to remove peace. Pair of scales, commerce. Death followed by Hades. And then the questions: how long will this last for? It's time limited, but there's a bit to go yet. And then terrifying disturbances, the whole world order is upturned. We'll leave the interlude in the 7th seal to chapters 7 and 8. It's possible to see it this way: conquest, bloodshed. Conquest leads to bloodshed. It leads to scarcity of food, and the the essentials of life. Death, people who disagree with the powers that be. Death, persecution. Watch the word Hades. Translating it as hell is very misleading. Bluntly, it's wrong. Hades is simply a transliteration of the word from the original language, and it means the place of the dead. It's a vague word in that sense. Death, and what follows death, is what the picture is here. The concept of resurrection came through what Jesus achieved on the cross and is worked out in the New Testament, but that's not part of the way of thinking of the societies of that time. Only the followers of Jesus had begun to get it. Time limited but not over. It's a picture of martyrdom. And then fear, terrifying disturbances as the social order upturns itself, and we've seen that many times in the history of the world. You could say attacks from outside, inside, a food scarcity, death is a possibility, maybe a likelihood. Hang on in there, endurance. God will sort it out in due time. That's an overall picture. Now let's look at actually what happened in the Roman era. If you look at the history of this, the followers of Jesus suffered intermittent persecution in the Roman Empire until the early 4th century. John was probably writing during the reign of Emperor Domitian, and that was a period of increasing persecution. In the 1st century, much of the persecution was localized. You saw it with Nero in Rome, blaming the Christians and then torturing them to death. But it spread out, and very often an edict from the emperor was implemented on the ground by whoever was on the ground carrying the Roman authority. Some implemented it with brutality, some didn't really implement it much at all. So it was a bit localized and uneven. 2nd and 3rd century there was intermittent violent persecution. It increased. The violence and the brutality increased. And for a short period there was widespread severe persecution across the Roman Empire, with edicts from various emperors. The empire was beginning to crack open and fall apart, and they got their revenge on the followers of Jesus, who were growing massively in numbers, even though the followers of Jesus did nothing but good for their communities. State persecution then ceased. But persecution has kept re-erupting in the history of the world. In Roman society, very much class. Roman citizen, slave. Women were definitely inferior to men. In the Christian communities there was a great level of equality. They didn't like it. Another religious group didn't like it because Christianity was growing, and all these various gods and religions flying around the place, they were losing numbers. And to get unity across the empire, the emperor claimed to be divine, and therefore you had to go into a temple somewhere, and a pinch of incense would be burned in front of a facsimile of the emperor. The followers of Jesus wouldn't do that. Only Jesus was divine. And the persecution then could involve a loss of livelihood, starvation, public humiliation in a community, imprisonment, and that was not a pleasant experience, physical violence, torture, quite common, body mutilation, rape of women, death of individuals, and even massacre of whole communities. It was not a good picture what they were facing. That's what happened. And the insight John was given is picturing what happened. Now let's look at what's happening today. If you look at the evidence, high and extreme levels of persecution of the followers of Jesus have increased markedly. Now, the way the media presents this is that the persecution is that Muslims are being persecuted. That's not the case. Worldwide, while other religious groups do face problems from time to time, the problems that the followers of Jesus face are far, far greater, and that's been documented by secular news organizations. The media publicly ignore it. That's the fact. Now, we can all face persecution because we do stupid things. They're facing persecution and discrimination because they follow Jesus. That's the criterion. And that's a big proportion of the Christians in the world today. Now just think about your own Christian group. 1 in 7 in your group, that would be a devastating experience. But the Christians who are facing persecution are mainly overseas, other countries, particularly Islamic states, totalitarian states, and areas where there's drug cartels. Because the way of Jesus is countercultural. Jesus warned his followers this was going to happen. The way of Jesus challenges other religions and shows their emptiness. But it also challenges gross evils. Many Christians have lost their lives because stood against drug cartels in some of the countries of South America. And the persecution today is discrimination and so on. Discrimination, denied education equality, can't be promoted above a certain level in many countries. In fact, it won't even get a job in some areas. If a wife becomes a follower of Jesus, she's kicked out of her home and never sees her husband and family again. That happens frequently. If a man becomes a follower of Jesus, his wife and family are taken away from them and he will never see them again. That happens. So, for example, when there's some disaster and provision is given by the world through the UN very often, and to countries giving help, the local people on the ground put the Christians at the end of the queue, and usually they don't get. False charges, that's all over the place. And in countries where there are state religions, that's the worst. Now, people of other religions do suffer persecution from time to time, but even putting them all together, they're not on the same scale as what the followers of Jesus face. These are the facts and the evidence drawn from reputable sources. Fundamental questions. How can we understand that phrase, the wrath of the Lamb? What an amazing paradox. Can Jesus show wrath? Does God send evil to punish? And what do we mean by God's judgment anyway? If we look at history, it just keeps repeating itself this way. From time to time, evil just simply seems to erupt, often in many locations at the same time. And we're seeing a bit of that today, usually centered round some leader with some particular agenda who abuses his power, but the local population have allowed it to happen. Some common source? Has Jesus given permission to the powers of evil? And again, looking at it, it's so often that way. Let's go back to our little picture. That's the sequence of the first 6 seals. The Roman Empire went through a pattern like that. And indeed, history shows that all cultures and empires tend to go through a pattern like this as well. But the followers of Jesus are the focus of most persecution. Not the only ones persecuted, but the focus of most persecution by far. And in the end, God intervenes. Enough is enough. The evil has gone far too far. But when seal 5 is opened, those who have suffered, how long must this go on for? And indeed, there are people today who are suffering. How long? Is there any hope? And the chapter points to two answers. Hang on in there, endurance, because God is coming to put things right, the real meaning of judgment. The wrath of the Lamb. Wrath means there are consequences for actions. Jesus comes to put things right. And he has the authority to do it because he is the Lion who is the Lamb. These repeated patterns, think of the world today. Think of recent history. Think of things happening today. Someone or one group have got an agenda, usually for their own benefit. So they attack other groups. And the concept of the in-group grows. One of us. And other groups are vilified or worse. Now you can see that happening on our television screens today. Don't agree with me? I will abuse you verbally. And that eventually opens the door to physical abuse. Ordered society and trade affected, and we're seeing that across the world today. As a result, the ordinary people are the ones who can suffer, and suffer most. It's a repeated pattern. We have to see it holistically together. And it centers on human evil. I want my way, I know what's best, as a result of which others suffer. And very often it ends up like that. And again, we're seeing that in the world today. How do we react if we're under that situation? Not observers from the sidelines as sometimes we are in the West. That's the message. And that message would carry enormous significance for the hearers of this letter. Bringing it together a bit, the first 4 seals. Power is used irresponsibly. A lot of that going on in the world today. And it certainly went on in the Roman era. And if you like, God says, if you want to go that way, you go that way, but you face the consequences for your actions. And that's a kind of open door. Satan and his horde create havoc, and humanity suffers. And that's the picture that's been given here, and that so often is true. Hope seems to evaporate. Listen to ordinary people in Ukraine today. Just an example of that. How long will this all last? That's the actual verse. Inhabitants of the earth is an idiom meaning the human race in its hostility to God. Till you judge and avenge. Suffering and martyrdom will continue yet for a while. That's inevitable. Jesus went through it, we will too. Jesus wasn't spared it, he went through it. We will too. And it's not a cry for revenge. Avenge, the word in the original, It's a cry that God's name would be vindicated. Come and put things right. It's not revenge. And the sixth seal, don't take that literalistically. It's a metaphor. It's apocalyptic language. It's prophetic language. You can look at some of the pictures that have been used elsewhere in the Old Testament. Life is so disrupted that everybody, every level of society, from the most powerful down to the slave, how do we get out of this? They're seeking for release in any way. You see, the fifth seal is focusing on the impact on those suffering for their faith because they are followers of Jesus and are living for him. The sixth seal is the impact on those who are causing the problems, who undertook the massacre. The leadership classes are focused on, but everybody who allowed the leadership classes to abuse their power irresponsibly. In the next presentation, there's an interlude and then the seventh seal. And this leads on to it. What's going to happen? What's going to come out of this? Let's just hold that for a moment and bring this together. If you look at history, the terrible destruction represented by these four horsemen has often been seen. In the process, God's faithful people have often suffered, sometimes died. And it's especially marked today. It's growing as the data show. But there is a day of vindication. God will come and put it right. But the question is this, and it's a two sides to one question. Why does God allow it? And why does he not bring it to an end? If you like, that's the big question. And I do not have easy answers to that. But here's some thoughts. This may be part of the answer. When God created humanity, he gave us free will. He breathed into us. If you like, we're no longer creatures ruled by instinct only. We have choices. But we abuse these choices, and when we allow certain humans too much power, or whether they grab it, but we allowed them to grab it, they pursue a selfish agenda and then evil starts to erupt. Sooner or later. We're seeing it today. And it's as if God is saying, well, that's what you've chosen. I gave you free will. You've got to live with the consequences. And so if you like, the consequences work their way through until the pennies begin to drop and God intervenes to say enough is enough. But the followers of Jesus, the people of God, the history shows we tend to stand against these abuses, and we're the focus of attack. And you even see cases of this, of vilification, the abuse of social media, and even court cases in the West, where the followers of Jesus have stood against something that is blatantly wrong and evil and going to hurt people. And they've been abused, sometimes losing a job in the process. This will happen, has happened, and it probably will get worse as I see the seeds of this being sown across the Western world. It's not a good picture. But if we know what's there and why, we're equipped to cope better. And that leads us into the interlude, the coping, and the final seal being opened.